what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story that most peace and solace either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday. Welcome back to my channel, or just welcome if you've never been here before. I'm not going to waste any time today. I'm going to get straight into the story. Actually, I do have to waste a little bit of time. I just need to put out a disclaimer that this case involves children, so if you don't like the murder of children, do not watch this video. Today's case is about Diane Downs. Diane Downs was actually born Elizabeth Diane Downs, and she was born in Phoenix, Arizona on the 7th of August 1955. We don't know a whole lot about Diane's childhood, but from the people who knew her, we can pretty much gather that she was a little bit of a wild card. She was very energetic and out there, and she liked to have fun and she liked to get her own way. She claims that when she was 12 years old, she was sexually assaulted, and she actually did testify to that. But it's unclear whether or not that's the truth or not, purely because Diane has a very long history of lying, and you'll see a demonstration of that very shortly. She met her husband Steve Downs in high school, and they dated for a couple of years before she went off to college, but she was only in college for a year before she was kicked out for being too promiscuous. But it was a Baptist Bible college, so I mean, take that with a grain of salt, the word promiscuous, but anyway. Then in 1973, she married Steve, and she actually ran away from home. The following year, the couple had their first baby, Christy Ann, and then in 1976, they had Cheryl Lynn, followed by Steve and Daniel in 1979. Unfortunately, Steve believed that their only son, who they nicknamed Denny, he believed that Denny was the result of an affair, so he wasn't very happy and he left. The couple got divorced, and I'm not entirely sure about the custody agreement that they had, but from what I can see, Diane had the kids majority of the time. She worked for the postal service and she did provide for her kids, but her kids also spent a fair chunk of time with their grandparents because Diane liked to go out and do what she wanted to do. The kids were at the grandparents so often that they actually developed relationships with their neighbors, with the grandparents' neighbors. That's how often they were there and socializing with everyone. And one of the kids actually told a neighbor that they were afraid of their mum. Diane, for the most part, remained single, but she was known for playing the other woman quite a lot, so when she did date, she was usually dating married men. Then in 1982, she fell pregnant and she actually gave birth, but this time it was as a surrogate. So she gave birth to a beautiful little girl, and she was able to name her Jennifer before giving her to the parents. On the 19th of May 1983, Diane and the kids left home at around 9:30 p.m. and they went to go visit one of Diane's friends. On the way home, Diane decided to take the back roads instead of going, directly home. And she said she did this because her and the kids were sightseeing. Even though it was late at night and it was dark, she said that that's something that they did quite often, was go sightseeing at nighttime. About halfway through their sightseeing trip going home, she said that the kids had fallen asleep and she saw a man on the side of the road flagging her down. So she stopped and asked, what's up? How can I help you? And she claims that this man asked for the keys, and in response she said, "You've got to be kidding." So he pulled out a gun, got Diane out of the car, reached into the car and shot the 3 children in the back seat before she pretended to throw her keys, and he's turned around to go and try and find these keys that she didn't actually really throw, and then she's jumped in the car and sped off. She said that he fired one last bullet and that hit her arm, and then, she was out of there. So she drove to the hospital and she started yelling out, "Hey, my kids are being shot, my kids are being shot." Unfortunately, by the time she got there, her 7-year-old Cheryl had already died. Her 8-year-old Christy, she had suffered from a really, really bad stroke. So she was in a very poor way. And then the 3-year-old Denny, he was paralyzed from the waist down. Christy had been so badly injured that her surgeon actually thought like she was dead. Like her vitals were so low, she was in such a poor state, she was in such a bad way. No one really thought that she would like pull through. Like they all thought she was gonna die. All the nurses who were there that night, they were all in tears for these children. It was a really, really horrific scene, and it was just horrible. And this is where things start to get a little bit weird, because the police show up and they obviously talk to Diane and they want to know what happened, and she was just very flat and very emotionless. Like she knew that her daughter had died, she knew that her other daughter was clinging to life, and her 3-year-old was paralyzed. He's 3 years old. Like that should evoke some kind of emotion, surely, and it didn't, and the police thought that was weird. Then the surgeon came and spoke to her about Christy, and he was very emotional about how badly injured Christy was, and so he was expecting a really emotional response from her mother, but again, she was emotionless. She was very just flat and didn't really seem like she cared. And she said something that he found really, really, really inappropriate, and he was just taken aback by. And she was complaining that she got blood all throughout her new car. Of all the things to whinge about in this moment, it's not your car. Despite her really weird demeanor, the police took her story very, very seriously, and they started a manhunt for this man with shaggy hair who she described that flagged her down. They went out to that location, they were searching for clues, they found like shell casings, and they were just surveying the entire area looking for anything that could assist them to trying to find this guy. I'm not sure how the public came to this conclusion, but they sort of came to the conclusion that this man was only dangerous to kids, for the fact that the kids were all so badly injured and she was just like scraped on the arm type of thing. And so the community was like terrified. They were really petrified, and like kids weren't allowed to go out in the streets. No one was allowed to go out by themselves. They had to stay close. Like everyone was just very guarded and protective at the moment, because they thought there was a crazy, dangerous, happy-go-lucky shooter like out in the world. I meant to say trigger happy, not happy-go-lucky. That's fine. So at this point, police were knocking on doors. They were literally going from door to door, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious. They were stopping cars that were going back and forth on those roads, checking boots, searching cars. They had divers in the lakes looking for the murder weapon, looking for the gun to match the casings. They were surveying all throughout the grass and wooded areas and everything. They also drew a police sketch of this man with shaggy hair, and I don't know how anyone ever gets caught with police sketches, because they literally never look like anyone, let alone the suspect. Like anyway, so at this point the police really wanted to try and like cement in Diane's story, because they hadn't found anything. They had nothing else to go of other than her story. And so they asked her, could we do a reenactment? And this reenactment was going to be broadcasted on TV. And she said yes, she was happy, more than happy to do it. This was probably a poor decision on her part, because she was a total narcissist and literally anyone could see that. She was seen on TV in the car, fixing her hair, checking her makeup, like making sure she looked her best before she went on, which, I mean, I probably would too. I don't know if I had just lost a child whether I would do that. I don't think I would give a fuck, but each to their own, I guess. And then when they start, she's like laughing and giggling, and like she goes to throw her keys because it's a reenactment, and then she's like laughing about the fact that she goes to throw her keys. And again, I could understand that if you had not have just lost a child and you were reenacting how you lost a child and how your children were shot, I could understand that you're like awkwardly giggling because like you're on TV and everyone's watching you and you feel silly, but not in that circumstance. And then she jumps in the car and she hits a cast, and she's laughing because she hit her cast, and she's like, ow, that really hurt. And then while she's still laughing and like getting out of the car, she's like, that was worse then, and then stops and just laughs again and doesn't say anything. And detectives at this point assumed that what she might have been about to say was, this is worse than when I shot myself, which I don't know if that's like a big connection to sort of draw from that, but So instead of like cementing in her story, they kind of just really had like a concrete suspicion of her now. They went and searched her house and they found letter after letter after letter addressed to a man called Robert Knickerbocker. And this was a man that she was totally obsessively in love with, and he was married. She called him Nick with a K, and they worked together at the post office, and as I said, he was married. He and his wife had been like on and off. They'd had their issues and been up and down, but there's no mistake in this. They were having an affair. They started to really sort of hone in on the forensics at this point because, again, they had nothing else to go off. And they realized that the blood spatter was really inconsistent with Diane's story. So in Diane's story, the man came in through the driver's side and shot the kids in the back. So all the shooting was done inside the car. And yet there was specks of blood found on the lower door frame of the passenger side at the front, which didn't make sense. At this point, Diane was pretty aware of the fact that she was looking suspicious. She was aware that the police were sort of taking a look at her and not necessarily believing her story, and so she actually decided to make her own appeal to the public, which is very different. So she had a news broadcaster come to her house and she appealed for any information. She asked this man, this suspect, to come forward and, you know, like hand himself in. She also retold her story and said that she wanted to make it very, very clear what happened. And then she goes on to try and defend herself by saying, if I was going to shoot my children, wouldn't I have done a better job at it? Wouldn't I have done a good job at it? Like, wouldn't I have killed them all? And she did this a lot. She did interview after interview, press conference, talked to reporters. She loved the limelight and she wanted to get her story out and she wanted to be ahead of it. She wanted to be the one telling this story, essentially. She didn't want anyone else to have a say or a spin on it. She really wanted exposure, and I think out of everything, she really wanted sympathy. She did one interview in particular that was really kind of detrimental to her downfall, and she was actually invited to bring her lawyers with her, but she declined this offer, which is not the brightest thing anyone could really do. And again, she was seen as a massive narcissist. She had the audacity to sit there and say, everyone keeps telling me I'm lucky, but I don't think I'm very lucky. Like, my arm hurts. Like, I couldn't pick things up. She's like, I couldn't tie my shoelaces for such and such amount of time. I'm not the lucky one. I think my children are lucky. Which is literally fucking mental. She kept saying that her daughter Christy would get her out of this, and like she would explain that she's not the one who shot them and it was this other guy, and she was just waiting for Christy to wake up from well, not wake up, but like regain the ability to speak, because at this point she couldn't speak due to the stroke, and she just kept saying, wait for Christy, wait for Christy. Despite the fact that Christy couldn't yet speak, the nurses did notice, and they made a note of this, that every time Diane walked into the room, poor little Christy's vitals would just like fucking spike through the fucking roof. And it was very apparent that she was scared of her mother. Luckily, the kids weren't ever placed into her custody. They both remained in hospital until, you know, later. By now, the police were starting to piece together a story or a theory of what might have really happened. And they believed that Diane had planned this. She'd turned around and shot all three children. They believe that poor Cheryl actually managed to open the door and try and like climb out. And so Diane has climbed across the passenger seat, opened that door, and then bent outside of the car and shot her. And then she's obviously gone around the side, put Cheryl back in the car, who was already dead, and then drove to the hospital. On top of this, they discovered that Diane had a handgun, and she had, from day dot, denied ever having a handgun or having any gun for that matter, and this handgun, it matched the crime. So they obviously examined this gun and they determined that the shell casings and this gun and the bullets and all that, it all matched up. It added up. And then they found a witness, and obviously this case was sort of plastered all over the town all over the place. It was all over the news and everything else. And so this person saw her car on the news and came forward and said, hey, I was actually driving behind that car on that night on that road. He said that he drove up behind this car and they were driving so slowly that his speedo wouldn't even register, because that's how fucking slow they were driving. And that obviously contradicted with Diane's story, who said she was speeding there as fast as she could, like pedal to the metal. That wasn't the case, according to this witness. The only thing they needed now really to hold against her was a motive, and that's where those letters from earlier to Nick come in handy, because she was obsessed and in love with Nick, but Nick didn't want to be like a dad or a father to someone else's kids, let alone like any kids at this point in his life. And she wrote to him saying, like, my kids are so easy, like they're no trouble at all, like it's fine, like they're fine. But he just didn't want that, and so she felt like perhaps if she didn't have the kids, he would fully commit to her and leave his wife. She really viewed her kids as like a hindrance to her relationship at this point, and she thought there's no way he'll ever commit to her with all this baggage, the baggage being the poor kids. And so she just thought if they weren't there, she'd have him all to herself. So at this point, the police finally like really come down on her, and they stop even entertaining her story, and they say to her, like, Diane, your story stinks, your entire story stinks, and it has from the start. And the audacity of this bitch, she says without missing a fucking beat, well, you better go get some deodorant then.
And your story stinks. This whole thing is it's done from the beginning.
I'm fine.
Which I know should make me like really angry, but it's just so stupid. Like, how can one person say something so stupid? Like, it's so hilariously dumb of a thing to say in such a serious circumstance. Like, by now little Christy was seeing a therapist, and she was really working on her communication skills, and she was starting to regain her ability to speak. But at this point she was still too afraid to sort of like talk about the accident, or not the accident, obviously it wasn't an accident, but she was too afraid to speak about the incident, that's what I meant to say, because obviously she was very traumatized. And so this therapist said to her, write down who shot you and we'll put it in an envelope and we'll burn it in my fireplace, and we'll keep doing that until you're ready. So every visit with this therapist, she would do that. She would write it down on a piece of paper, they'd put it in an envelope, and then they'd chuck it in the fireplace. Finally, when she was ready, she handed over the envelope, and it said, my mom. 9 months after shooting her kids, Diane Downs was finally arrested. At this point, Diane was actually hugely pregnant. And not only had she planned this pregnancy, she actually completely orchestrated it. She found this guy on her postal route and decided that he was attractive, he had good features, high cheekbones, and things that could be passed down to a child. And she decided to go and visit him with a bottle of alcohol and some weed, and she said that she knew her cycle so well that if she had sex with him just one time, she knew she'd fall pregnant, and she fucking did. She was pregnant as fuck. So while she's on trial for shooting her own children, she's got a massive baby bump, which is like the most bizarre, terrifying thing to see. She was charged with first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, and she pled not guilty. She was seen by psychologists, and she was actually diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, which I just gotta say, I fucking called it. And then she was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, plus 50 years with the chance of parole after 25 years. So what's the point of adding 50 years if she has a chance of parole? I don't fucking know. So Diane's children, Christy and Danny, they were actually adopted by the lead prosecution man and his wife, which I think is such a beautiful, like, wow, like it goes to show how much he genuinely cared to get justice for these poor fucking kids. Shortly after her trial, Diane gave birth to her daughter, unfortunately her daughter. And she named her Amy Elizabeth, but she was taken away from her immediately and given to adoptive parents who immediately changed her name to Rebecca. Rebecca was told from a pretty young age who her mum was, and she actually wrote to Diane when she was younger, but since she's grown up, she lives to regret that, unfortunately. She really regrets ever trying to communicate and contact her, and she thinks her mum is just like a vile, disgusting human being, which she's not wrong, and she's had a lot of issues like admitting that that's her mum, which is really sad. It really is a shame, but she's done a lot of interviews and she's done a lot of work on herself and within herself, and she's got a bright future ahead of her. Diane actually ended up escaping prison in 1987, insane, and she was recaptured 10 days later. That's a long time to have a crazy kid shooter like out in the open. She was only 66 miles or like around 100 kilometers, I don't exactly know the conversion, away from where Christy and Danny lived with their new parents. So they were petrified that this woman, Diane, would come and try and make contact with the kids or try and hurt them even. And so once she was recaptured, their adoptive dad, the lead prosecutor, he really petitioned and fought hard for her to be transferred to a different prison because it was just too close to home and it petrified them. And so he won that, luckily, and she was moved. She applied for parole in 2008 and 2010, but luckily both times she was denied, as she still claims innocence, which I don't think she'll ever get out if she's still claiming that, because everybody knows she's not innocent. So it goes to show she hasn't learned or changed or evolved in any way, shape or form. Her next parole hearing was supposed to be 2020 this year, but I believe it was rescheduled for 2021, but it could actually be later than that. I'm not entirely sure. And that's due to the pandemic and the virus. And the virus is something she was actually very vocal about this year. She did an interview and back in February of this year, she claimed she had the virus because she loves attention that much. She claimed that she had the virus despite there being 2 negative tests and no one else in the entire prison being tested positive for it. She plucked it out of thin air, she must have, which is wild. She also said that she watched the Oregon map very closely of like where positive tests were popping up, and she claims that she was doing that to keep an eye on her children that she still loves and cares about very deeply, and it's a shame that she'll never be able to show that to them and they'll never believe that. Of course they're never gonna fucking believe it. You shot them, you tried to kill them, you psycho bitch. That is the story of Elizabeth Diane Downs. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you leave your opinions down in the comments below. I would love to hear your opinion on this case, because it's crazy and I don't understand why you would ever be able to do that to your children. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Make sure you guys are being safe out there. Don't go sightseeing in the middle of the night when it's dark and you can't see anything. Don't fall asleep while your mom's driving, and most importantly, don't shoot your fucking kids, people. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe. Bye.